In World War II, a German U-boat stopped the war. It rescued the enemy, and for that, it was bombed. The Atlantic Ocean is not a place for mercy. It is a vast, indifferent desert of salt and iron. In September 1942, the water was a deep, bruised purple, reflecting a sky that offered no sanctuary. I remember the smell of the U-156 most of all. It was a suffocating cocktail of diesel fumes, unwashed bodies, and the sharp, metallic tang of battery acid. We were hunters, prowling the dark corridors of the South Atlantic, silent as ghosts and twice as lethal. Below the waves, time ceases to exist. There is only the rhythmic hum of the electric motors and the condensation dripping from the freezing hull. My name is not what matters. What matters is the day our commander, Werner Hartenstein, decided to challenge the very nature of total war. We had tracked the RMS Laconia for hours. Through the periscope, she was a giant, a former Cunard liner converted into a troopship, fat with cargo and destiny. She displaced nearly 20,000 tons, moving with a majestic but doomed grace across the swells. At 10:07 p.m. the order was given. Tube 1, fire. Tube 2, fire. The boat shuddered as the torpedoes left the tubes, a violent mechanical cough that sent death racing through the cold depths. We waited in the suffocating silence of the control room, the stopwatch ticking like a heartbeat in the dark. Every second felt like an hour. Then, the dull, bone-shaking thud of impact. Twice. The Laconia began to tilt almost immediately, her lights flickering like a dying candle, before plunging the world into darkness. When we surfaced to survey the wreckage, we expected the grim satisfaction of a successful kill. We expected to see debris, oil slicks, and the inevitable disappearance of an enemy vessel. Instead, as the hatch opened and the fresh salt air rushed into our lungs, the night air was pierced by a sound that no submariner is ever prepared to hear. It wasn't the sound of drowning soldiers or the roar of burning oil. It was the sound of thousands of voices screaming in Italian. Thousands. We moved the U-156 closer, the searchlights cutting through the black silk of the water like a jagged knife. The sight was a nightmare etched in silver and blood. The Laconia had been carrying nearly 2,000 Italian prisoners of war, guarded by British and Polish troops. They were our allies, packed into the lower decks like cattle, now clawing at the freezing Atlantic as the ship groaned its final breath and slid into the abyss. We saw men fighting over bits of wood, people covered in thick black fuel oil that blinded them, and the white foam of the wake choked with bodies. I looked at Hartenstein on the bridge. The wind caught his jacket, and for a moment the predatory mask of a U-boat ace slipped. He was a man of the old school, a sailor before he was a killer. He saw the women, he saw the children, civilians, families of British officers, and our own Italian brothers in arms. The logic of war dictated we should dive. Submarines are fragile things. On the surface, we are nothing but targets, slow and vulnerable to any passing aircraft. But Hartenstein didn't give the order to submerge. He looked at the chaos and gave the order to save them. "Station everyone on the casing," he shouted. "Prepare the lines." The next 72 hours felt like a fever dream. We began pulling people from the water, their skin slick with oil, their eyes wide with the terror of the abyss. The deck of the U-156, designed for nothing more than a few lookouts and a deck gun, became a crowded island of humanity. We reached down, grabbing slippery wrists, pulling shivering souls from the jaws of the ocean. We crammed them into the torpedo room, where they sat among the remaining G7E torpedoes. We packed them into the officers' mess, into the narrow gangways, into every crevice where a human body could fit. The smell of diesel was replaced by the stench of wet wool, the copper tang of blood, and the shivering heat of 100 desperate souls. By the morning of the second day, the U-boat was so heavy with survivors that we could no longer dive. We were a sitting duck, a 700-ton steel coffin if anyone decided to attack. Hartenstein did something even more radical, something that made the High Command in Paris scream with rage. He broadcasted a message on an open frequency in plain English, not coded. He gave our exact coordinates. He told the world, the British, the Americans, the Free French, that he was engaged in a rescue mission and would not attack any vessel that assisted him. It was a death sentence for us. He had revealed our location to every hunter in the Atlantic, inviting the enemy to our doorstep in the name of mercy. By the second day, we had nearly 200 survivors on board and hundreds more in lifeboats being towed behind us in a long, tragic line. We looked like a mother duck with her ducklings, trailing across the vast, empty sea. I remember a British woman holding her infant, shivering against the cold steel of our conning tower. Our cook, a man usually stingy with rations, handed out our coffee, our hard bread, our precious blankets. For a few hours the war had stopped. There were no enemies on the deck of the U-156, only survivors. We flew a makeshift flag with a red cross draped over the bridge, a desperate signal of neutrality in a war that knew none. We thought the rules of humanity would protect us. We were wrong. On the morning of September 16th, the sky was a pale, mocking blue. A four-engine American B-24 Liberator appeared on the horizon, a silver speck growing into a predatory shape. I remember the glint of the sun on its wings. We felt a surge of relief. Help had arrived. We signaled to them in Morse code, pointing to the Red Cross, pointing to the hundreds of people on our deck and the 4 lifeboats tied to our stern. The pilot circled once, then twice. We could see the crew in the cockpit. We waited for life rafts to drop. We waited for a message of coordination. Instead, the bay doors opened. The first bomb missed, sending a geyser of white water into the air that nearly swamped the boat. The second hit a lifeboat directly, vaporizing it and everyone inside in a flash of orange fire and jagged splinters. The shockwave rocked the U-156, throwing survivors and crew alike against the steel bulkheads. The screaming started again, but this time it was louder, fueled by the betrayal of their own side. The American pilot had been ordered by his base on Ascension Island to sink the sub, regardless of the survivors. Hartenstein stood his ground as long as he could, his knuckles white as he gripped the railing. But the aircraft was banking, coming back for another run, and the water was churning with the impact of machine gun fire. He had a boat full of his own men to protect, and the hull was already taking damage. "Cut the lines," he whispered. It was the hardest order he ever gave. "Clear the bridge. All survivors into the water." We had to push them back. I remember the look on their faces, the sheer, hollow betrayal. We had given them hope, we had shared our bread, and now the very people who were supposed to save them were blowing them out of the water. We dived, the sound of the bombs muffled by the closing ocean. In the silence of the deep as we sank to 60 meters, no one spoke. The only sound was the sobbing of a crewman and the creak of the hull. We had tried to be more than soldiers, and the world had responded with fire. The aftermath of that day changed the sea forever. When word of the attack reached Admiral Karl Dönitz, he was livid. He saw Hartenstein's mercy as a weakness that had nearly cost a precious U-boat and its crew. He immediately issued the Laconia Order. No more rescues, no more picking up survivors, no more mercy. The destruction of the enemy's ships, he wrote, is the only task of importance. You must be hard. The age of chivalry at sea, the old code of the mariner, was dead, buried under the waves of the South Atlantic by a single American bombing run. Hartenstein survived the incident and was even awarded the Knight's Cross. But he was a changed man. He died later in the war, in March 1943, lost with his entire crew in U-156 off the coast of Barbados. No one rescued them. People ask why he did it. Why risk a multi-million-mark weapon and 50 German lives for the enemy? I think he knew that if we lose the ability to see a human being in the water instead of a target, then there is nothing left worth fighting for. The Laconia is still down there today, 3,000 meters below, resting in the eternal dark. It is a tomb of steel, oil, and forgotten promises. But the memory of those 3 days when a wolf stopped to save the sheep remains a ghost in the machinery of history. It reminds us that even in the darkest hours of a global slaughter, a man can choose to be a man. Even if the world isn't ready to let him, the Atlantic is still cold, the wind still bites, and sometimes, when the fog is thick enough and the waves grow tall, you can almost hear the voices on the broadcast, a captain calling out into the dark, hoping that someone somewhere still believes in the mercy of the sea.